Welcome to Szabo Cast. Here we discuss all things from a working class, trans, anarchist, analytical perspective. Due to the nature of this show, listener discretion is advised. My name is Skylar, my pronouns are she, they, they, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today. I've talked about this in other videos already, but they were more about other related issues, but I want to make an entire video dedicated to this one single point, because I feel like it could be elaborated on in a much more effective and meaningful way by giving it its own episode. Since October 7th, we've heard a lot of politicians in particular talk about anti-Semitism for the first time, both on the Israeli side and especially, which is more important for this episode, on the US side. I don't think I've ever seen another politician before October 7, 2023 mention anti-Semitism. Of course, I could be wrong, but it's like you can't go a single day without a US politician mentioning anti-Semitism, that it exists, that it is a problem. And I don't want to diminish the reality of the fact that, yeah, anti-Semitism is a real problem, and I'm going to talk about that in this video as well, because, yeah, I'm not going to minimize that, but it does need to be discussed, and I think that we need to dissect where it's coming from, and more importantly, what it isn't. A lot of politicians in the United States and defenders of Israel will say that criticism of Israel as a nation state is anti-Semitic. This is extremely harmful, and I think that we need to really hone in on how damaging that particular sentiment is to the overall big picture here. The first thing that we need to pay attention to is the fact that, well, yes, what Israel is doing is not only unjustified, but it is an absolutely disgusting act of genocide. There's no getting around it. Hamas has actually proposed an actual solution to where the hostages that Hamas has, would be released, all of them, for a permanent ceasefire and an end to the war. This ceasefire would also include boundaries from Israel as a nation state and the IDF, so that, the IDF doesn't go into Palestinian villages and neighborhoods and towns and cities and, terrorize them. Because we all know that this has been happening for far fucking longer than October 7, 2023. But Benjamin Netanyahu has not only declined this, but he was planning to invade Rafah long before this proposal was even made. And that is what is happening right now. And it is angering, because our taxpayer dollars went to that, my friends. And that's so fucking maddening. Oh my god. So, there's no denying at this point, unless you're an absolute fucking psychopath, that what Israel is doing is a genocide. There is no ifs, ands, or buts in this scenario. Even when the nation state of Israel gets what they want, which, supposedly was supposed to be the hostages, and they were going to get them all, they still said no, and proceeded with their ethnic cleansing campaign. The nation state of Israel doesn't even give a shit about their hostages. They only give a shit about genocide. And that's the whole point, by the way. Because when you set a precedent that criticizing this nation state of Israel, which is doing a very clear, bright as day act of genocide, and you call that criticism anti-Semitism, then you are doing some real fucking damage. It's actually a double-edged sword in this case. For one thing, it actually makes it harder to actually fight anti-Semitism. Because anti-Semitism is broadly defined in several ways. Or a better way to put it is that it manifests itself in several ways. For example, as we have gone over in the past, we talked about how Christian Zionists support Israel specifically because they want Jews to go back to Israel so that when the rapture happens, the Jews will burn in hell. That is their belief. That is what the Christian Zionists believe, and that is why they support Israel. And what's interesting is that supporting Israel, especially in this case, well, actually in any case, because
that is the legitimacy in which Israel claims to stand on, that in of itself is anti-Semitic. Think about that. The whole premise of Israel using, this attempt at legitimacy is only stoking the fire even further. Another huge downside to it is that when you call criticisms of Israel anti-Semitic, you begin to raise an entire generation of people who believe that Israel is like the cabal. And that's not something that you want to instill in a population, especially in a population where education is routinely being defunded, a population in which our resources are routinely being taken away by billionaires and politicians, and those billionaires who are lobbying politicians. I've maintained in the past that anti-Semitism and broader fascist movements have been useful for exclusively billionaires because it distracts people from actual class analysis of identifying the actual problem that is the capitalist system. So when, say, a neo-Nazi does some kind of class analysis, the neo-Nazi may identify capitalism as the root of all evil, but then they will somehow appoint a scapegoat on top of that, and that will be the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So, see what I mean is that these forms of anti-Semitism, they're not uniform, they're not the same, but they all serve the same evil, and that is it promotes a hatred of Jews. What it also does is that it distracts people from the real problem, and that is that Israel is committing an ethnic cleansing genocide of Palestine, and the United States is endorsing it. The people who are complicit in this, it doesn't matter if they're Jewish or not. What matters is that they are rich, evil fucking politicians. They want blood. They want murder. They want to fuel the war machine. They want to expand. They want to do imperialism. Palestine is not the end game for Israel, and who fucking knows what the end game for Israel truly is at this point? I mean, if I had to identify one thing, it might be a total consolidation of power and maybe some kind of sustained expansion of their nation state and empire. They certainly want to do what the United States have been doing for the past 500 years, with indigenous genocide and enslavement of the African proletariat, so on and so forth. It just seems that the nation state of Israel and how it is functioning as a nation state is trying to mirror that of the United States. I mean, that is exactly what Germany wanted to do too throughout the Holocaust. They wanted to emulate the United States. Okay, I mentioned Nazis a few times in this already, and I do think that we need to talk about them as well, because they play a huge factor into anti-Semitism. If Israel and the IDF were like some kind of actual meaningful force for actually fighting anti-Semitism, then why isn't Israel and the IDF attempting to bomb the United States of America? And I'm serious about this. Not that I want that, of course, but think about this. There is a line of reasoning, albeit very absolutely faulty, for Israel bombing Palestine. Of course, the real reason is genocide, ethnic cleansing, and imperialist expansion. But what their politicians want you to believe is that they are fighting Palestine and doing this ethnic cleansing campaign because they're trying to fight anti-Semitism. Well, the United States is full of anti-Semitism, both currently, which is on the rise according to the FBI's own statistics, referring to hate crimes for the last several years, and even historically, even with U.S. politicians like Franklin D. Roosevelt turning away Jewish refugees who were fleeing the Holocaust because they thought the Jewish refugees were a national security threat. Those said Jewish refugees were later exterminated in a concentration camp. Not to mention the Immigrant Exclusion Act. It was meant to fight off anarchists, but the thing is that Jewish refugees who were fleeing the pogroms in Eastern Europe at the time would later become anarchists when they came to the United States. So what this means is that they're excluding immigrants in particular who are not anarchists yet, which means that they are excluding Eastern European Jews. It is a historically anti-Semitic and hateful law that has only unfortunately gained a lot of momentum in the last 20 to 30 years. Not to mention, America was very much aiding the Nazis throughout the Holocaust. A lot of US companies were doing trade deals with the Nazis, sometimes patenting certain technology for Nazis to use in concentration camps and in war. There was the American Nazi rally that took place in Madison Square Garden in 1939. Is this starting to sound familiar? Is this starting to sound like America, in the past supporting a genocide? Why does this sound familiar? Does this mean that America is, repeating history here? It seems like it. All I'm saying is that there are a lot of hate groups in the United States, and it seems like the United States has done little to nothing to meaningfully combat that, and it's really not cool when the United States, particularly US politicians, are defending Israel on the premise of criticism towards Israel is anti-Semitic, because it comes off as these intentions are really disingenuous. If there was a serious attempt to meaningfully combat anti-Semitism, there would be policies by the United States to fight these white supremacist groups who are anti-Semitic at its core. It seems like the US government does not recognize that white supremacist movements are a security risk to our country. Sure, maybe sometimes you'll get some liberal politician or some liberal pundit who lambasts like the Proud Boys or something like that. But what about the Blood Tribe, right? The Blood Tribe in particular has several chapters in the United States, and they're a growing neo-Nazi movement. Why not ban them? Why not pass legislation that will combat movements like them? What about Atomwaffen or the Rise Above movement or NSC 131, the fucking Patriot Front? So if Israel was serious about actually fighting anti-Semitism, Israel would be using the bombs that we give them with $14.5 billion of our taxpayer dollars. They should be sending those bombs back here because we have the anti-Semites. Now, am I saying that there are no anti-Semites in Palestine? No, I'm not saying that at all. The truth is that, yeah, there are anti-Semites in Palestine, but does it justify a genocide of a struggling diaspora? No. And for the record, no, I don't want Israel to bomb the United States. But the line of reasoning that politicians are using to justify this genocide is a double standard. Because if you're going to make the argument that Palestine has anti-Semites, and therefore that's your justification, then you have to use the same line of reasoning for the United States. I'm sorry, but that is the truth. The truth is that not only is supporting Israel in and of itself anti-Semitic, but it is a very poor excuse, even if we are to entertain their own logic. Because at the end of the day, fascists don't really have logic. They don't really use reasoning. They just want to fucking kill. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. I appreciate y'all tuning in. I know this was a short one, but hey, I figured that a short one would be nice every once in a while. So be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, But also follow me on Spotify if you're interested in hearing my other podcast episodes. I've been told that listening to my podcast episodes is really nice when people are on a long drive. So yeah, I can recommend that. And you do that with my podcast, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, spread the word. Share this with your friends. You can support me on Ko-Fi and Patreon. So that's a thing. You can do that too. But anyway, until next time, solidarity.